The US Sanctions Framework. The US Sanctions Framework is an extremely important thing to understand. And the reason is that US sanctions are the most far reaching, have been around for the longest time, which means that the practice and implementation of US sanctions is evolved and nuanced. The US is one of the few superpowers that is able to demonstrate its sphere of influence through the use of sanctions. And so there is a lot to understand from looking at how US sanctions work, not the least of which is to make sure that we comply with US sanctions or we understand the implications fully of not complying with US sanctions. And it is equally important to understand how long the arm of the US is in these matters. Now, there is a long list of acts and lists of sanctions, entities that are sanctioned, people that are sanctioned. So it's one thing to look at it as a laundry list, but it is extremely important to understand it structurally. So in this particular session, a lot of effort has been put in to visualize a framework which will help all of us contextualize, place in reference every single sanctions event that the US orchestrates. And that gives us the ability to understand sanctions at any given point in time. And that phrase, any given point in time, is very important because sanctions are never static. It's an ever shifting sand, and you as a sanctions practitioner need to know what is the current state at the time that you're contemplating or advising on a transaction. And what might be true last week might not be true today or next week. And you will see how that works. US sanctions is not one single session. US sanctions is all pervading. Through the entire program, we are going to be either on the side of the US looking at how to enforce sanctions, or we are going to be on the side of a target country looking at how the sanctions impact the target country, or we are going to be where we usually are, which is looking at transactions that are being attempted and whether they should be allowed and what permits them and what is not permitted.